I will be honest with you. I think that Tzeporah Berman is completely misinformed on climate and energy. I believe that she is a hypocrite for flying here to condemn the oil and gas and oil sands industries of Alberta. When I look at the history of the attacks by the anti-oil activists of Alberta, the roots go back to Ms. Berman, and I'll show you why that is my opinion. It's unclear to me whether she is an unwitting agent of foreign funders, or, as some might say, a useful idiot. I don't know if she's aware of her role in this geopolitical trade war against Canada, and perhaps she really believes that she's saving the planet. And if so, she should stop flying so much to climate conferences and speeches. Ms. Berman stated to the ATA that it is a conflict over Trans Mountain and over the oil sands that is forcing the conversation today. That's not true. What is forcing today's conversation is over 2 decades of foreign-funded anti-resource development activism in Canada. This curious phenomenon was first noted by journalist and author Elaine Dewar in her detailed account, A Cloak of Green, which was published in 1995. Dewar had innocently been drawn into a Saving the Rainforest event. If you recall, this was about the time of the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit of 1992. Dewar was struck by the combination of corporate parties hanging around with eco-activists, and she began exploring how these multinationals like to use eco-groups as a front to establish preferential relationships with Aboriginal groups, typically to get special access to minerals or resources, often circumventing national sovereignty. That's a pretty short summary of her work, so you should read it yourself. That is the foundation of why we are in this situation today. Canada is a land rich in resources. Other people have noticed that. And we are locked in a geopolitical trade war that, in my opinion, based on the following evidence, is fronted by environmental activists who are now well installed within government and industry, not to mention living rent-free in the heads of most citizens. My objective in this talk is to evict these unwanted eco-squatters from their claimed position of moral high ground and ethical purity and expose them and their role in this geopolitical charade. But before we go any further, let's take a quick look at some facts. This slide is from the U.S. climate and energy policy analyst Roger Pielke Jr. This shows that in the age of climate diplomacy, the use of fossil fuels has only grown worldwide. Now, this graph from BP, which can be cross-verified with similar stats from the International Energy Agency, shows that renewables occupy a vanishingly small segment of the world's energy supply, and there is no likelihood it will increase substantially in the near future. And this image shows you why. This shows the comparative energy equivalencies to 1 cubic mile of oil. Just so you know, the world uses 3 cubic miles of oil equivalent energy every year, and 1 of those cubic miles is oil. That demand is only expected to grow. So the world is not getting off fossil fuels anytime soon. The world is not making a disruptive move to renewables, no matter what ideologues like Ms. Berman tell you. These are the facts. Much of today's problem on climate and energy issues have their roots in Enron. As noted by Lawrence Solomon in 1993, Enron was a keen driver of the Kyoto Protocol. In an article in 2009, Solomon described it as this: Enron had figured out how to make millions in the cap-and-trade program for sulfur dioxide emissions, thanks to changes in the U.S. government's Clean Air Act. To the delight of shareholders, Enron's stock rose rapidly as it became the major trader in the U.S. government's $20 billion a year emissions commodity market. Enron chairman Kenneth Lay, keen to engineer another encore, saw his opportunity when Bill Clinton and Al Gore were inaugurated as president and vice president in 1993. To capitalize on Al Gore's interest in global warming, Enron immediately embarked on a massive lobbying effort to develop a trading system for carbon dioxide. Solomon continues, political contributions and Enron-funded analyses flowed freely, all geared to demonstrating a looming global catastrophe if carbon dioxide emissions weren't curbed. An Enron-funded study that dismissed the notion that calamity would come from global warming, meanwhile, was quietly buried. Solomon goes on to say, between 1994 and 96, the Enron Foundation donated $1 million to the Nature Conservancy and its climate change project, a leading force for global warming reform, while Lay and other individuals associated with Enron donated $1.5 million to environmental groups seeking international controls on carbon dioxide. Now, in the 1990s, $1 million was a lot of money. Lay was very good at lobbying the Clinton-Gore government, and one of Enron's employees sent the Palmisano memo from Kyoto. The memo, entitled Implications of the Climate Change Agreement in Kyoto and What Transpired, summarized the achievements that Enron had accomplished. I do not think it's possible to overestimate the importance of this year in shaping every aspect of this agreement, he wrote, citing 3 issues of specific importance to Enron, which would become, as those following the climate change debate in detail now know, the biggest money plays. And those are the rules governing emissions trading, the rules governing transfers of emission reduction rights between countries, and the rules governing a gargantuan clean energy fund. Enron's employee proudly stated Enron now has excellent credentials with many green interest groups, including Greenpeace, World Wild Fund, NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council, German Watch, and Ozone Action, WRI, World Resources Institute, and World Watch. And this position should be increasingly cultivated and capitalized on, monetized, Palmisano explained. So, as most of you know, Ms. Berman got her activist career start with Greenpeace. You may not be aware that Donna Laframboise wrote a book called The Delinquent Teenager, wherein she revealed that many of the people writing the IPCC, the UN Climate Panel reports, are Greenpeace or World Wild Fund associates, not the world's leading climate scientists, as Ms. Berman would have you believe. So with these initial insights, let's take a look at the bigger picture. As you probably know, Vivian Krause has been tracking foreign funding to Canadian environmental charities and non-governmental organizations for over a decade. Vivian has found that mind-blowing millions of dollars have been funneled into this country, funding groups associated with Ms. Berman. And most of these funds are dedicated to blocking pipelines, phasing out coal, blocking resource and forestry development, and pushing for renewables and a price on carbon. Now, a fellow named Matthew Nisbet has been tracking a group of billionaires who, in 2005, set out to change the world. These billionaires and their foundations had been investigated in the U.S. in the 1950s for precisely the reason that they were deemed to have far too much power with no oversight. And my information here comes from Nisbet's peer-reviewed paper and the ClimateWorks WikiLeaks document, which includes a case study on the success of their Design to Win program. Too much power? No oversight? Yes, they have proven it to be so. Literally, these billionaires decided to cause a sea change in the global economy through forcing cap-and-trade policy worldwide. That's what Nisbet reports. They intended to achieve this by funding local ENGOs, making it appear to be a grassroots movement, just like Enron did. They have vested interest in renewables, and they want to put $12 trillion in wind and solar on the grid worldwide. They appear to have no concerns that they will be interfering in domestic policies worldwide. They are billionaires, and they don't seem to care. They formed the ClimateWorks Foundation and paid the world's most influential management consulting firm, McKinsey & Company, some $42.4 million in consulting fees. And they came up with a plan called Design to Win. Was this all a big secret? Nope. Much of it is online, but connecting the dots is the challenge. That's what Vivian Krauss started doing for all of us. Nisbet reports that these Climate Works Foundation partners met with some 170 environmentalists, scientists, and activists in about 2005, and they assured them that the technology existed to replace fossil fuels. Well, that is false. There's no replacement for the use of coal, oil, and natural gas in contemporary society. That is probably why some of the oil company executives that met Tzeporah, as she told you in her speech, seem to be a bit blunt or harsh with her. This may be why she feels resistance, rejection, or outright hatred from so many people in the oil patch in Alberta and elsewhere, because Tzeporah is either blissfully or willfully ignorant of the facts of how the world runs and what constitutes climate change. Yet her ideological stance, her social media platform, and her past Greenpeace stunts over the years have gained her global status as an expert on something she clearly either knows nothing about or she's deeply indoctrinated in an ideology that's not based on facts. As I will show you, there are clear conflicts of interest related to the funding of the organizations that she has worked with.